G'day, I'm Sean, and welcome to the CarExpert Podcast. We're back again for another week, and we've got Josh joining us. How you doing, mate?
Good. I think Scott got caught at the snow after Melbourne's loss on the weekend, so I had to sub in again.
Yes, he's just stayed at Hotham for afterwards. He says he has a cold, but I think he might just be a bit cold. James, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well. We're back. We're going to be talking about a couple of interesting things this week. We got the new Corvette ZR1 or ZR1, depending on where you're from. We got the return of the FJ Cruiser, and Josh is going to tell us a little bit about his recent trip to Japan. But before any of that, we're starting off with the top news stories from the CarExpert website over the week. Starting with the GWM Tank 300, it's been issued a recall for a faulty vehicle jack. Now, the recall notice was quick to point out no safety hazard does exist, but the jack won't be able to be used with the vehicle. 975 Tank 300s are included in the recall, and you can get it fixed by contacting your local GWM dealer. The next generation Nissan Patrol is closer than ever. We're hoping that Nissan will have a reveal date shortly, but their CEO has said that they should be revealing it in the third or fourth quarter of the Japanese financial year. So we're expecting October to March where there'll be an announcement. Speculation is rife since Infiniti announced the QX80, where they dropped the V8 in favour of the 3.5-litre twin-turbo V6, which produces more power than the old V8. So we're expecting that to come in the Patrol, but stay tuned to the CarExpert website to find out more. Toyota has made some changes to its Corolla Cross lineup to keep in line with a bunch of other models. They're ditching petrol only and have an exclusive hybrid lineup for the Corolla Cross, which means it's now more expensive. It starts at $36,480 before on-road costs. It's an increase of about $3,000. By Toyota standards, the Corolla Cross has been a sales disaster, selling only 5,100 models in the first half of this year. Compared to nearly 12,000 MG ZSs, that's not so good for Toyota's little compact SUV. And sticking with Toyota, the USA division are in a spot of bother. They're looking to have to replace over 100,000 V6 engines across Tundra and some Lexus models. In May, Toyota announced that it discovered machining debris in the 3.4-litre twin-turbo V6 that powers the Tundra and the Lexus LX600. Toyota and Lexus will replace 102,092 engines, 98,500 of which are in Tundras produced between 2022 and 2023. The fault doesn't affect hybrid models, meaning Australian-delivered Tundras are unaffected. However, Lexus LX models are yet to be confirmed. And that wraps up the news for this week, guys. So let's dive straight in. Chevy Corvette ZR1, the new one has been announced, and it is an absolute monster by all accounts. So who wants to take me through what's going to be powering this beast?
Yeah, so there's a new 5.5-litre twin-turbo V8, which seems to only be driving the rear wheels, and it's got a massive amount of power and torque. So it's 783 kilowatts and 1,123 newton meters.
That's like a Chevy Silverado torque. Like, that's huge.
Yeah, so it's a new V8. It's got like a crazy track pack on it. The ZR1 has always been the pinnacle of Corvette performance, but given how far ahead this latest generation Corvette is compared to the previous ones, it's basically, you know, a mid-engine supercar already, and the base ones are bloody quick. So the fact that this one's is punching these numbers out is insane. It's got 318 kilowatts more than the standard Z06, which is an entire Mercedes-Benz E53's worth of more power. And it's also got a bit of Australian twist on it. It's got carbon revolution wheels on it. I'm not sure if they're standard or whether they're optional, but you know, that's a cool little Aussie contribution there.
Yeah, some Geelong wheels to go on your probably $500,000 Chevy Corvette. One thing that you didn't mention there, it does have a double overhead cam flat plane crank, which means it's going to sound ungodly. It's going to be a ridiculous sounding car.
I mean, the Z06 already sounded incredible with that flat plane crank V8, and I think, you know, Chevrolet have always wanted to pitch the Corvette as a supercar in these higher performance versions of it. And now, I mean, with those power outputs, you can't deny that it is well and truly nearly in hypercar territory.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned, James, possibly only rear-wheel drive. Surely not. Surely they're going to send some power to the front wheels with this thing.
Yeah, well, they said there's a dual clutch transmission, and that's pretty much it. There wasn't really too much detail from the reveal, but they don't even have proper performance specs. There's an expected sub 3 second 0 to 100 time, which that's, I guess, on a dry day with warmed up tires and, you know, being able to get the power to the ground. But there is a quoted top speed of 346 kilometers an hour, which is
that's wild,
pretty fast for a car that produces an extra 544 kilos of downforce.
That is going to put a few of the Europeans to shame, I would imagine. I mean, let's just take it's probably not coming to Australia. We know that much at this point in time. But if it were, feel free to have a punt on how much you think it would cost.
Well, it's an interesting question because they've always been the affordable supercar or the affordable super sports car. I want to say mid 300s, maybe 400.
So Ram TRX or Chevy Corvette Z06 for Josh?
Yeah.
James, what do you reckon?
It's a good question as well, because I think the normal ones, or normal, is probably around the 200 mark. And so when the hybrid comes, I assume that'll push that closer to 300. I imagine the ZR1 would be even more expensive again. So 350 to 400 sounds about right, because it's not, they're factory right-hand drive, which means you remove that cost of converting them to right-hand drive. But yeah, it's kind of a question mark, isn't it? Because even if it's not coming here, it's still a pretty cool thought to think that you could have that much performance for less than $500,000. That's pretty good.
I mean, that's the big thing. Anything European that has those kind of numbers is millions. Like, we're not talking like sub 1 million, we're talking in the millions range. So, I mean, if it were to come here and even be $500,000, I think there would be a few better off Australians lining up for it quite quickly.
And people tend to actually drive them. So unlike some of, the supercars from Ferrari, Lamborghini, etc., people actually drive their Corvettes, which would be, I don't know if I'd want to be driving alongside mine on the Melbourne streets, but
not on the rainy days I've had recently, no. But look, it's not the only Corvette coming. They do have an E-Ray coming. Can you explain what an E-Ray is?
So the E-Ray is a hybrid, and I believe it adds all-wheel drive. So it's got the V8 mixed with an electric motor and batteries. So it's meant to be more fuel efficient, but also adds more performance. And that will be coming to Australia. It'll be more than the current ones that are currently available, but that's kind of cool that they've managed to. I remember back a long time ago when Chevrolet first trademarked the E-Ray name, and we're trying to figure out what it meant. Was it going to be an all-electric one? Was it going to be a hybrid? And then to sort of see that name come to fruition, and it sort of looks like like the other ones anyway, so it'd be hard to tell other than a couple of small details. But yeah, an all-wheel drive electrified Corvette sounds like a pretty cool way to bring the nameplate into the 21st century and beyond. So yeah.
I'd be keen to put it up against, sort of some of the Italian things like the SF90 and stuff and see how it actually would go with that hybrid boost. Let's move it along though. Toyota FJ Cruiser coming back. Now, I mean, if this is coming back, if it is, that's a big deal, because you want to talk about cars with cult status. The FJ Cruiser is right up there.
Yeah, that original FJ Cruiser was kind of ahead of its time, wasn't it? Because it was that modern retro take that maybe like the current Defender has, but the Defender's had a lot more success. The FJ Cruiser sort of went the way of the dodo. But there's reports out of Japan saying that there's a potential that the FJ could be revived again, but instead of being a big Prado-based thing, it could be based on the new Toyota Champ pickup, which is
probably the cutest pickup in the world.
Yeah,
right now.
It looks like a little trolley almost. But so I imagine this would almost be like a Jimny rival, something like that. And instead of the big thirsty V6, they're saying that the 2.7 litre 4-cylinder petrol from the Hilux could be used. Now, that engine in the Hilux, while only here it's only in the base, low rider versions, they do use that engine in a number of other vehicles in markets like Japan. So if you get the new Prado offers this engine, the 70 series can be had with this engine as well. There's a couple of other random things in there where this is like the affordable, attainable, or the more basic engine option. And I guess when you think about Japan or some of those Southeast Asian markets where this car would be, fairly popular, if the average speed you're doing is between 30 and 40 kilometers an hour, it sort of makes sense. I know here when you're trying to drive on the freeway in 6th, then that engine's spinning at like 2,500 revs, and it sounds not great at that speed either. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The Jimny has done a really, really great job around the world in its current form. So I imagine that if Toyota can pull something like this off and make it properly off-road capable, it could be another cult hero as well.
Now, this has all come off the back of an announcement that Toyota did earlier this year, where they had a silhouette of something that looked suspiciously like an FJ Cruiser. Now, it might also be they've got an electric Cruiser variant coming as well, so it could be that was in the silhouette. But there's a lot of hope that this could be a cool retro 4x4 that could actually take it to Suzuki, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks fun and like small, so it's not like it's going to be sold in markets like Asia where you can't get things that are too big because they're too expensive. The possibility of an electric one is a really cool idea, but a lot of these Toyota announcements that came in the last 12 to 18 months were sort of in response to heightening EV demand and, questions from media and shareholders and various industry stakeholders about what Toyota's plans were for EV moving forward. Now that we've seen a number of manufacturers now sort of come off that a little bit, it'll be interesting to see what Toyota actually does and how much of the promised models come through in the time frame that was discussed. But yeah, I think, these modern, retro cars are really cool. We're seeing that across the board from, like the Renault 5 and, the Jimny, the Defender. It's coming out across the board now. And I think that's really cool to bring back some of the fun cars from the past into, the modern world.
I mean, even in the Toyota stable, the new Prado just doesn't look that new. It looks kind of like a retro car, and it looks a lot kind of like the old FJ Cruiser did. So I'd like to see it come back. Leave a comment, let us know. Would you like to see it come back? But Josh, we're going to turn attention to you now, mate, and tell us a little bit about your recent trip to Japan.
Yeah, so I went to Japan for a couple of weeks with some friends, and while none of them are really car enthusiasts, I am. So it was great to experience JDM culture firsthand for the first time.
So, okay, I'm sure it's not all Tokyo drift, but tell us a bit about what were the kind of cars that you actually saw on the ground while you were there?
In the main, it was mostly a lot of K cars in the streets of Tokyo, which is where I spent the whole trip. Basically just anything small. And a lot of these like Honda N-Box and Toyota Voxy, these little like vans and little upright hatches, those are the most common thing you'll see on the roads.
Do you see a lot of sort of the, what we revere here, like R33s and R34s and Silvias, is that sort of stuff just driving around like a Falcon or a Commodore would here?
No, unfortunately not. You do see more of them than you see here, but it's, they're still a rare sight on the road.
All right, and now the big question I have, Japan is quite a polite culture, but it's a very small place. How is their driving on the road compared to Australia?
So yeah, I hired a car for one day and I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Again, driving in kind of inner city Tokyo, I was shocked by the lack of traffic. Right throughout the day, even during like close to peak hours. I think their road system has just been really well planned, and that goes for a lot of other elements of the city. It's just a very carefully thought out place. And the speed limits were quite low, but everyone just sped.
It's just like Tokyo Drift, man.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of, as I do when I'm driving in new countries, I was sticking to the speed limit and being really conscious of my driving, and that meant sticking in the left lane, and people were flying past me on the motorway. And I mean, the problem was that the speed limit on these motorways is kind of 60. So you've got people doing 80 or 100, which is a safe speed. But when you have people like me hogging the left lane, it was a weird experience.
All right, so thinking of all the cars that you saw there, what would you like to see that's in Japan exclusive come to Australia?
I love the K car sports cars. So I had an MX-5 recently on test and I absolutely love that car, and there's no real rival to that here. So things like the new Daihatsu Copen, the Honda S660, people have started to import them in the earlier model years, but I'd love to see them sold in the local market, and I'm sure just about no one would buy them, but I would be one of the few.
There you go. You have at least one sale. So that's a positive. Well, while we're sticking to things that are not here that we'd like to see here, James, I understand that you recently found out that the new Hyundai Sonata Hybrid won't be coming to Australia, which...
Yes.
What?
Yeah,
Anyway.
Well, so the Sonata's been out for a couple of years now, and they got like this really major facelift. And after we got promised a number of models when this generation first launched, and then got pared back to just the N line, we thought perhaps there was a chance once electrified sales started greatly increasing in Australia, and particularly when the Sonata competes with the Camry, it seems like a logical step to bring in the hybrid. But at the recent launch of the Tucson hybrid, I asked some of the product planners about what the plans were for Sonata moving forward, given the Camry is almost 90% of that market. You've got the Tesla Model 3 and the BYD Seal, all sedans that are sort of defying market trends by having solid volume based on their electrified drivetrains. Hyundai said no. Which is very odd.
They're not looking to break into the Uber market then.
No, and considering the Sonata is already a fairly low volume product, Hyundai's gone to the effort of complying it and homologating it to right-hand drive, which I think we're one of the very few markets in the world that get that car outside of Korea. it just seems like a really odd thing to do. So, the hybrid that's available in Korea and other markets like North America, it has a different hybrid system to some of the other Hyundai and Kia cars that we get here. So it has a 2-litre naturally aspirated petrol engine with electric motor and lithium-ion battery. It gets a 6-speed automatic, kind of like the Sportage and the Sorento do, but it obviously isn't turbocharged. And it's got fairly thrifty fuel use of around, low 4s, which sort of makes it competitive with the Camry. But then like the latest Sonata N-Line, it's got that cool sort of RoboCop face, a really luxurious interior with big screens. So it's strange that they don't think that it's worth bringing here, but perhaps that hybrid system hasn't been engineered for right-hand drive, but that's not what they told me. So yeah, it's a shame.
Hard to know, but okay, well, we're not getting the Sonata. We'd like to see a hybrid Sonata, but what other hybrid cars are available overseas that you guys would like to see here? I'll start with you, James.
Yeah, there are so many that I can think of. Like thinking of Japan, I love the new Nissan Note. It's like this little sort of Yaris-sized hatchback that's been relegated to the Japanese domestic market for a long time, but a few people import them here of previous generation. I've seen a couple of new generation ones, and they're quite cute little things, and they run a version of the e-Power hybrid system that Nissan does. So that'd be a really cool thing to have at the entry point. I also think it's a shame that Volkswagen hasn't been able to bring in the plug-in hybrid versions of their top sellers like the Golf and the Tiguan, because otherwise they don't really have hybrid options here in those classes. And then some other stuff, I'm trying to think of, the Sonata's one.
Sorry, I'll interrupt you quickly. As a current Golf owner,
Yes.
Would you consider going to the hybrid Golf from your GTI?
Here's a fun story for you. For those of you who don't know that I own a Golf, because I keep it a really good secret. When I was buying my Golf, I was actually hoping that they were going to bring the GTE of that generation in, because at the time it was actually meant to come. And then they decided against it because there was so demanded worldwide that they stopped selling them even in the markets that it was sold, because they had a lot of backlogs. It's sort of like Toyota RAV4 hybrid vibes, where there's a lot of backlog. If that was available here, and given Volkswagen's been fairly good in terms of like the Cupra and Audi ranges in minimizing the premium for PHEV over the equivalent turbo petrol model, I genuinely would have considered it, because being able to drive 50 Ks at a time in just EV mode, given my owned car is often my second car and only used for certain things, it would be good to know that I could do that in, the Golf, that the Mark 7 Golf is one of my favorite generations of Golf, and to have that with an EV driving experience for the mundane stuff and still being able to have fun on the weekend if you want to go for an extended drive, I genuinely would have considered it.
Well, there you go. That's an exclusive here on the CarExpert Podcast. Josh, what about you? What foreign hybrid cars would you like to see come to Australia?
Well, my trip to Japan definitely helps with this one. I've got to say the Toyota Crown.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Toyota's longest lived nameplate, and I think the brand takes a lot of pride in that car. And the latest generation has kind of strayed from its roots. It used to be, a big luxury sedan, and they've turned it into a crossover kind of SUV for the current generation, but it still looks really classy inside and out. The interior is absolutely packed out with luxury features, and yeah, I'd love to see that car here.
I mean, it's a Lexus without being a Lexus, isn't it? Really.
Well, I think that the original Crown evolved into like what we know as the Corolla and Camry today, and I believe the Corolla name actually translates to Crown. Right. So there's variations of that formula that have sort of turned into modern Toyotas. But yeah, I agree, the Crown stuff is so cool, and the fact that they have a family of really cool looking versions of it now, and they're all hybrid, it's a shame that they haven't elected to bring those here.
I think the big one that's missing is the new Prado hybrid. It is at this stage not coming to Australia. We are getting a hybridized Prado.
Very active.
Very, very mild hybrid. And also the new Prius. And I never thought I'd say this in my life. I am disappointed that the new Prius is not coming.
Yeah, there's a few grey imports out there for like 60 grand. I've seen some on the road. They do look cool. It's like the meanest Apple mouse you've ever seen.
There you go. I'm sure they'll put that on the quote when they do the ad for TV. The meanest Apple mouse you've ever seen. James Wong, CarExpert.com.au. All right, guys, we're nearly at the end. It is time for our picks of the week. And as our special guest, Josh, I'll let you go first. What is your pick this week? Is it something from Japan?
Not quite. Okay. I'll start with something a little closer to home.
Yep.
I went out for a Drive Against Depression drive day yesterday with James and Jack, also from the office. And it was my first kind of experience with that charity. And I had such a good time. There were probably, 30 or 40 maybe people there with their cars. And we kind of took a drive route up through Gembrook, some really nice driving roads in Victoria, and then finished at YTG Bespoke, which is a garage full of exotic cars. And it was great to see that community kind of supporting mental health, raising some money, and just creating some connections with other like-minded people.
What were you driving?
I was driving my Volvo, which was
lovely.
I haven't driven for about a month,
Yep.
and I kind of rediscovered my love for that car, which was another added bonus of the day.
There you go. All right, James, what's your pick this week?
Well, other than the drive against depression stuff, which we've spoken about a number of times, I found this really cool video on Instagram, which I believe was originally a news bulletin segment, but it was a group of Hong Kong students who moved to, I think, Sydney during the pandemic. And so they couldn't go home because they got stuck here. And so they decided to import one of the iconic red Hong Kong taxis to Australia to sort of bring a piece of home here with them. And so they, drive it around. There's a really fun segment talking about, what they do with it and why they love it so much. And being of Hong Kong descent and having visited there once or twice, it's the red taxi is a really, really big part of the, the road network there and the culture. So it was really cool to see something so different, rolling around on Australian roads.
Kind of like seeing a London taxi floating around.
Kind of,
so,
yeah,
it's a
exactly
weird
right.
vibe. Mine has to be, actually, it's a bit of a faux pas from last week. Last week's podcast, we actually had to film it on the Friday before due to people being away. And so we weren't actually able to congratulate Oscar Piastri on his first F1 win. So congratulations to Oscar Piastri on his first F1 win at the Hungaroring. Whatever you might say about it, a win is a win, winning's winning, whatever the Dom Toretto line is. But secondly, congratulations to him for coming second again yesterday at Spa, and commiserations to Scott's doppelganger, George Russell, who was disqualified.
I was going to say, that's why Scott's not here today,
Yeah, I think
right?
that's
Because he got disqualified from the GP.
That's the truth. Unfortunately, Woody the toy was disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix. That brings us to the end this week, guys. Thank you so much for coming along. Josh, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy return to work week.
Thanks for having me.
Now that you're back on deck after a long break, a much deserved long break, but what do you got on this week?
So I'm currently in a Suzuki S-Cross, which is interesting. I've had a kind of a little train of Suzukis over the last few weeks, and then I'm getting into my first BYD.
Oh, look out.
For my next test. So the BYD Dolphin coming in later this week, and I'm really interested in that car.
Well, James, anything on the horizon for you?
I'm actually going to Tasmania this week to drive the new Porsche Taycan. So I'm really excited to go on my first Porsche event and also drive that car on, Tassie's a beautiful place, so many great roads. So combine that with the scenery and, a cool new experience. I'm really excited to do that later this week.
And, late July is the best time to go to Tassie, as everyone knows.
Yes, I might be taking the 4. Any of the 4s, please.
Anything with really good heated seats, I think,
and
is
all-wheel
what you're going to
drive.
need. Yes. Something to look forward to. Well, I'm sure James will be talking about his trip to Tassie in the coming episodes. We will be back next week, maybe with normal programming resumed. We'll see how sick Scott really is by then. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thanks, boys, for taking the time out of your week, and we'll see you next time.